brainstorming some very specific barriers and then getting into the solution side of it. To give a sense of where we're going to go with today's meeting, I want to cover just a few administrative things. And then we are going to do a little bit of just reflections if anybody wants to offer some from our last conversation when we identified a whole lot of things that folks seem to think need to get changed. We will spend the bulk of our time. We're going to now start splitting things up into a few points along the continuum of access. And by that, let me explain. We talked last time about everything from getting to a destination for recreation, to parking, to utilizing, to the equipment, whether that's ski lifts or adaptive equipment, to the post-use and everything. What we're now going to do is start dividing that up into different buckets. So today we're going to focus on from the moment somebody leaves their house and transit to the point of entry and entering the actual location, whether that's a ski resort, a lake, or a trail. Really focus for today on that from transit to entry. On our next call, we'll get more into the actual facility and all of the resources that may be involved there. Again, whether that's a ski resort, a mountain trail, an urban path, or anything else. And then we're going to have a separate dedicated conversation informed by what some of our members brought up on the last one about technology and information and what we can do, whether that's apps or online resources or maps, so we're getting better information out to everybody. So that's how I'm planning to address or structure the next few conversations. Today, we're going to, as I said, really focus on that from transit to entry. And what I am going to ask everybody to do is kind of frame things as we do that in the, here's the current condition and the problem with it, and here would be a better way of doing things. We're going to want to be moving, as I've teed up on our last few calls, to by this summer really be starting to identify the recommendations for change. And that's the other thing that I do want to mention. I'd like us to be thinking when we talk solutions, everything from what the law should be, to what rules should be in place, to what are some of the best practices that should be undertaken, whether that's by state government, local government, or private parties who operate any of these different outdoor recreational opportunities. So that's the intention for today and the structure of the next few conversations. And as I often say, that's the best plan as of today, and we'll see if it survives where we all go with it. It's my intention. But if you all start taking us in another direction that you think is more productive, we'll be fluid with it. The last thing I am going to ask, and Carrie is a bit under the weather, and that may be mild. She's been fighting COVID for a couple of weeks now. So she refuses to take the day off. Carrie, my one question for you is if you can pull up when our next executive council meeting is. As I think everybody knows, we're trying to have a couple of members from each subcommittee join the main task force to have a little bit of a conversation about our work. So I'm going to plant that seed now. At the end of the meeting, I'll come back and see if anybody wants to volunteer for that. Before I start taking us into reflections and brainstorming and the ideas of how we're going to fix it, does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Barrick, I don't think there's any questions, Barrick, but I want to note Samantha Albert, I think you're here on behalf of Connor Hall. Is that correct?
Yes, Carrie, thank you for flagging that. I'm here on behalf of Connor. He will be back later this week.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to welcome you and make the introductions.
Thank you, Samantha. It's good to have you with us. And you guys are used to hearing me say this. It's mostly for the benefit of YouTube or those who may watch it later, or we do may have some people online. We will have opportunity for public comment at every one of these meetings. If we stay on agenda, I'm intending for that to be right around 4:15 this afternoon. In addition to that, if members of the public want to submit ideas, there is a website and links with email on Dora's website. We can always drop that in the chat and send it around. I believe all of you have that. But we will be holding time for public comment. And immediately before we go into public comment, our last agenda item today is going to be to really start picking all of your brains about the stakeholder engagement. We're going to do multiple phases of stakeholder engagement that will range from people being able to submit stories and testimony and ideas online through the Engage Dora platform, Two, we also want to identify with all of you if there are specific topics where you think we should expand that, whether that's through online surveys, through focus groups, or online town halls, where we can bring in additional constituent perspectives on all of this. So we're going to get to that after we brainstorm some of the ideas. It'll be a recurring topic, but I want to kind of have that front of mind for all of you as we talk about challenges and solutions in the system. The first thing I'm going to do, though, since it's been a month since we've been together, I would love to just ask each person to weigh in with any reflections, big takeaways you had from our last conversation, or just new thoughts on the topic of ensuring accessibility to outdoor recreation here in Colorado. And Jen, you got on early, which means you're top left on my screen. So I'm going to go to Jen and then to Kurt.
Okay, well, how much time do I have? Because I've got some great stories.
Jump in for a few minutes.
Okay, so Cody has been involved with Special Olympics skiing this winter. And Melanie, this certainly is not any kind of reflection, but both of these stories are from ski areas this last couple of weeks, where the Special Olympics were competing and there was practices, and we were at a ski area for the regional competition that was not accessible to wheelchairs whatsoever. Like, some of the parents had to take 4-wheel drives up to close to where the lodge was, and then use multiple persons to get power wheelchairs into the lodge, the main lodge and everything. There was multiple families that were struggling getting up manual wheelchairs with the user in it, trying to get up metal staircases to where the main event was held. Luckily, my daughter uses a power chair and a manual wheelchair, and we were in that same category. And at our local ski area, we were up there doing a practice, and they do have an elevator, but it was broken on one event, and another time the ice had frozen it shut. So these are just some little but big examples of that transit to entry, and also, how it just gets access gets overlooked by whether it's the ground crew or planners or even a group like the Special Olympics.
Thank you, Jen. Kurt and then Christina. Reflections on our last conversation, identifying barriers, and I know we talked snow sports, we talked a little water, or just additional thoughts you've had since our last meeting.
And so I just need clarification. Are we just talking from entry point or from transfer?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
right now it is wide open, just reflecting on our last conversation. Yeah.
Right. And I'm sorry I wasn't at the last one, but I would just reiterate my one big story is had a person who power chair user needed to get them to Estes Park area, and no public, no transportation from DIA to Winter Park. We actually had to get another organization to rent a minivan for the 3-day that they were up there, and so that's my big huge thing, that some affordable. If we can't get people from DIA to Estes Park, I think that kind of draws a big big picture.
Thanks, Kurt. Christina and then Samantha, I'm not going to put you on the spot. You can nudge Connor next time you see him. So why don't we go to Christina and then Sharon?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it brief. Our last meeting, I had COVID and I was delirious, y'all. So not a whole lot of reflection on that one. I apologize, is my reflection. But kind of looking towards the future, the weather is, especially today, has been so beautiful out. And I think our conversations in this group have very much reflected, as per usual, over the winter ski season and the inaccessibility of ski areas. And with the weather being as nice as it is, I went out climbing in Staunton State Park this last weekend. I was like, oh, it's climbing season. Like, we get to look past ski season now and look at how inaccessible everything else is. And I think my brain has just been very on winter sport mode. So I'm excited about that.
Good. It sounds like the weather is cooperating for my pivot in our conversation, and I'm glad you're feeling better. Sharon and then Melanie. Reflections on our last conversation about the wide set of barriers people discussed, or just thoughts that have been on your mind since the time we were together.
For me, it's been a lot of thinking about entry point type situations for public golf courses, if they actually have something accessible for wheelchair users to be able to participate on the golf course. For trails, being able to make sure that we can get bikes or equipment on the trail or to paths. And then for skiing, I talked to an individual who had tried to go skiing, and I can't remember the number of parks that they were going to, but they said a lot of the adaptive equipment was all stored at Breckenridge. So pretty much any resort they went to, whether it was uh, Keystone, Copper, a few others, and I may have the names of the specific ones wrong, but it seemed like they were all headquartered, all of the equipment, all of the setup stuff at one specific location. So it wasn't only going to the ski resort, but then getting to the ski resort, then going back to another one, and then going from that one back to another ski resort, and through all of that, still having to find handicap parking, getting in and out, and all this stuff was just to get equipment, just to get the day started. So that's a huge entry complication for me, because getting to a ski mountain sucks. Having to bounce around to multiple ski mountains would be even worse. If I'm having to park and I go through that and I get shut down 2 or 3 times, I'm probably done for the day. Like I wouldn't continue to participate after that point.
Understood, and I appreciate that. Melanie, any reflections, takeaways, or thoughts since we were together last?
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about was a comment that I think a couple of folks mentioned in one of our, maybe not our last conversation, but in one of our last conversations. And it might be ripe for today's conversation as well as thinking about solutions, and that is overuse of parking permits for handicapped parking at all sorts of public venues. It feels like it's very easy for someone who doesn't really need that permit to have access to that permit. And that's shutting out people who really do need that access. And that's one of the things I hear that from the folks in our industry, that they feel like they have no control over that situation. But is that a piece of the conversation we should have today?
Thank you, Melanie. What I'm going to do is kind of take us from 30,000 feet, what the subcommittee is legislatively tasked with doing, to the topics that I'm hoping we can focus on today, and then the structure of the conversation. And I know I end up reading this at most of our meetings, but I am going to read from the legislation what we are tasked with. And it says that the purpose of this outdoor subcommittee is to identify barriers to basic access to and enjoyment of the Colorado outdoors for persons with disabilities, and make recommendations for addressing those barriers. Specifically, we're required to submit a report with your findings and recommendations, including recommendations on best practices and guidance for creating basic access to Colorado outdoor spaces for people with disabilities. And I frame all of that because I think in some cases people jump to, what law do we need to change? What do we need to require? And I absolutely want you to feel that that's an arrow in your quiver, that is something you can recommend. I also want to make sure that you're thinking as broadly as possible about what best practices or guidance you may want to offer, whether that's for the state government, DNR, Department of Natural Resources, Parks and Wildlife, or your local governments, or whether it is for the operators or the manufacturers of different equipment, or for different nonprofits and other organizations. All that to say that our solutions should include everything from carrots to sticks, and laws and compliance and oversight, to what are we going to really implore people to do that would make things better. Now, the way I want to do this conversation is, I think in group conversations like this, there's a real tendency, you're listening to somebody talking about a problem, and we start our own thinking going to, what's the idea that I'm going to offer that's something different or new? Instead, what I want to do is ask each member to identify what is a specific challenge or a problem that exists in things now. And if you'd like to offer a solution, I invite you to. But what we're going to do is stay on that specific barrier or challenge that one person identifies and go around the whole group to brainstorm and kind of build on one another's thinking of what might be some of those solutions, whether they are changes in law and requirements, best practices, guidance, new equipment, or other things. So that's how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to mix it up. Sharon, I'm going to go to you first on this one. And again, the focus today is from transit to entry. So whether that's getting to a location, whether that's arriving there and unloading equipment or parking, as Melanie just alluded to, or some people have mentioned even getting the first basic access. Can you get to the base of the ski slope and the lift? Can you get through those blockades to the trailhead? And I'm going to push everybody. I think we also jump to mountain ski resorts or remote parks and lakes. Let's think about urban trails. Let's think about suburban paths and green spaces. And yes, let's think about mountain biking and hiking and kayaking and skiing. So Sharon, I'm going to come to you first with anything that you want to name and put on the table for this group to brainstorm around, from transit and transportation to arrival to point of entry.
I think if I was going to narrow it a little bit, I'd probably focus on point of entry and equipment. We are in a community where everybody uses assisted devices for something. If we want to participate in a good majority of these, we're going to need some type of equipment. So whether that's a mono ski, a hand cycle, some type of golfing chair, what can we do to get basic equipment just to enjoy that activity, whether that equipment is being stored on location or being handled by Parks and Rec, or if we have to maybe assign a grant or something so they can just have basic equipment for us to be able to enjoy these activities. Otherwise, a huge barrier to entry is just getting that equipment to begin with. And we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. Same thing with transportation. Some of it can be tens of thousands of dollars to get equipment there. But if I was just going to have a friend take me to a golf course, I can't participate till they have the equipment. If I had my mother drive me to a ski resort, I can't participate. None of these things I can participate in until I have the equipment to do it.
You found a flaw in my structuring of these conversations, and I'm going to roll with it. On a future one, I think we'll go really deep on the activity itself and at the location. But you've brought up the fact that why are we even talking about going if somebody can't get access to the equipment? So let me open it up. And Christina, I'm going to go to you first and then to Kurt. What ideas do you have that state government, local government, private industry, nonprofits, what could any or all of these folks be doing to try to help solve this? As Sharon pointed out, it's sometimes bulky, it's often expensive equipment.
Are you asking specifically on the equipment piece?
Yeah,
or...
let's go with equipment, and then we'll come to a new topic next.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Sorry, I was jotting notes down on point of entry. For equipment, my brain always goes to, and Sharon just voiced this beautifully, of the socioeconomic barrier that folks with disabilities face when getting outdoor equipment. I think that is huge. That is one of the biggest barriers. I run adaptive climbing programming, and that's forever and always the biggest barrier, is just the financial piece of, can you find transportation that will get you out to a climbing area, to a ski resort? It's probably not the public bus that's taking everyone else. You're probably, hiring, as Kurt said, you're probably hiring a van. You're probably hiring some other third-party option. When you get out there, do you have a prosthetic leg that's, you're able to climb in? Do you have an adaptive climbing harness? Do you have your sit ski? All of that costs 10 times the amount that the equipment that I personally use does, right? So that's the socioeconomic barrier is always my first thought on that.
And do you have thought? I'm going to keep pushing it.
Go
I'm
for
going to
it.
do this with everybody. Do you have thoughts on, if you were going to make a recommendation of how do we make some of this equipment more accessible, more available? Should we look to a government program? Should we look to a public-private partnership? Should we ask industry to kick in? Should we push for a nonprofit that does this? What are some of the ways you think we could make this equipment more available and accessible?
That's a good question. I think all the above in a lot of ways. We should not be relying on our nonprofits. We should not be relying solely on our private partnerships, right? This intersectionality above everything, always the answer. I think that the industry does need to step up. I think a lot of outdoor industries are still very unaware of how many disabled people are out there, especially pushing the boundaries in outdoor sports, whether that's, your urban trails, your golf courses, to shredding down a mountain. I think a lot of people, like, again, working from my experience in adaptive climbing, when I go to climbing organizations and climbing companies, people are like, oh, I had no idea this was happening. And I'm like, okay, so that's where we're starting. And so, I think that gear gets cheaper and gear gets more readily available, and people have a wider understanding of gear when people understand that people are using the gear. I don't know if that makes sense saying it out loud, but I think we need to rely on private partnerships, and we need to get our industries to step up a little bit. And a lot of that comes from education, I believe, in our current state of being.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
To you. Again, let's stay with Sharon's identified challenge of accessing equipment and being able to get the equipment to enjoy. Do you have thoughts on solutions or places that we should explore in our conversations?
Are you asking me specifically?
No, I'm sorry, Kurt.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm in agreement with Christina. Is the cross. So what are other states doing? That's what I would like, kind of think. Like, I just saw an article, but it said nothing about the finance about Wisconsin using or buying the track chairs that are like the off-road. I don't know how these they're wheelchairs with tank, wheels, like kind of, the treads, tractor treads, whatever. How do they finance those? They're having them out at their parks, being a person with a mobility impairment, that really would be important to me, to get around. The golf course things, I know, I think the city of Denver has some carts. They used to. How are they currently, funding that? And is there a budget that for local planners that already are buying carts, should a certain percentage by law be accessible? So who's following up with that? I think an education piece to the industry maybe would be very powerful to show the power of the dollar, that, hey, if you put these things there, we're going to come, we're going to spend our money there, we're going to eat there, we're going to sleep there, we're going to, that type of educational system. Yeah, those are just creative fundings. I know everybody's a little overdosed on, all the different fees, and it's hard to get that through legislations, the added tax or whatever. But I just feel like there's got to be some creative funding opportunities privately, and publicly.
I appreciate those ideas and pointers. And Carrie, we'll be sure to add that to the research list to find out what some are doing. Josh Winkler reminds me that DNR actually has some chairs at Staunton and Barr, and Colorado Springs has some as well. But maybe we can do more to find out what some of our municipalities are doing, what the state is doing, what some other states are doing. And then I see Samantha nodding along as we're talking about the economic impact. And certainly OEDIT has a real interest in these growing industries and the revenues from them. Let me go to Jen and then Melanie, and let's stay on this equipment. And we've put a lot of ideas on the table, so you're welcome to build on those or offer some new ones. What are some solutions, from government to private to mandates to our strong encouragement to get this equipment more accessible?
Well, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is kind of what Kurt was alluding to with, isn't a certain amount of thing through ADA. So say you have to have a certain amount of parking places versus, based on the square footage of your business or whatever it is. I don't know the exact things, but how does ADA affect the ability for equipment to be there? And I guess I was thinking like at a ski area in the ski shop, they have all their ski equipment. Why not have a couple bi-skis or mono skis in there for people, and you're just putting that into your bottom line, your operating expenses. I know at the one of the hot springs in Glenwood Springs, they have some really nice roll-in waterproof wheelchairs that you can just use. They're just sitting there so you can get people into the hot springs, and they have a ramp that they've built in there, and they've all done that, and they're not a municipality. They've done that all on their own. I worked for a lot of local governments, specifically in aquatics over the years, and I think that they've kind of been ahead of the game a little bit in trying to provide adaptive equipment for their users. And so to me, it's good business practice, especially as we were talking about with the economic impacts of that, to have equipment ready for your users. You know what, like as Kurt said, the track chairs, we've used those at Ridgeway State Park, which is supplied by CPW, so Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and that is a huge benefit. So you know, maybe we just need to you know, we don't want to be begging for grants and funding all the time. Shouldn't this just be a part of an operating expense?
Thanks, Jen. Melanie, and then Sharon, I'm going to have you close out your own challenge with solutions that are on your mind. But Melanie, what are your thoughts of what recommendations we may want to consider, what strategies to get some of this equipment more available, readily available?
I would like to look at Great Outdoors Colorado and whether there is the possibility of accessing some broad-based funding through Great Outdoors Colorado that various providers could apply for. Would Great Outdoors Colorado's portfolio need to be expanded to allow them to do that? But it's an idea. I don't know enough of the details of what their current requirements and limitations are in what they can do, but it seems like there might be an opportunity there to make recommendations that would fit nicely with this issue.
Thank you, Melanie. Sharon, you identified the problem. Do you have some thoughts on some of the strategies to create a better world?
Well, I'm not in law and I'm not political, but I feel like some type of grant or law where a certain percentage of the tax, depending on the volume of people going through a place, is put specifically to making it accessible by law or expanding on ADA. You know, if something's gone and it's a first come, first serve, like I can understand that, but at least having something there so we can participate. I know getting to and from transportation is a huge thing, but I mean, if we're worried about getting someone from point A to point B, whether it's taking a shuttle or Access-a-Ride or something else, that's, if I do have my own equipment, that's not going to be possible either, just getting that equipment from point A to point B. So just transportation and barrier to entry. I think if we can have some things on spot and it be regulated, like it's actually required that it's there and a part of their business, I think that'd be the best approach. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get people to want to spend this money up front if they don't know it's valuable or not, but they won't know until it's there and we can actually participate and use it.
Understood. Thank you. I'm going to read a comment that Samantha dropped into the chat, and then I'm going to bring Kurt in for a next barrier. But Samantha, just shared that, the ideas of the creation of a regional accessible gear labs and establishing a grant for accessible equipment for orgs and businesses. And I do know that, and Josh is just reminding me that there are some outdoor grants through DNR is one funding source. So we'll dig in and get some more information on that. John, I'm going to bring you in on this next round. I'm going to over-explain what we're doing for your benefit. I know you got stuck in a meeting. My question to Kurt is going to be this. We're really focusing today on from the moment an individual leaves their home until they hit the entry point of some outdoor recreation, from how they get transited and transport themselves, and we're hearing now about equipment, how they get there, what they find when they get there, from where they can park to where they can unload, to how they physically make entry to this outdoor recreation. Kurt, my question to you is, what's a barrier in that continuum from departure to arrival and entry? And then we're going to do the same thing going around the room. Christina, you're going to be first up on solutions. But Kurt, to you, what's a barrier that there's got to be a better way for?
Well, I think the biggest one is affordable transportation. Unless you have your own van, or you can afford to rent a van for, $500 a day or whatever, it is really hard to get to any place, west of I-25. And if it's in RTD's route, you can get there, otherwise, I mean, you can't even get to Red Rocks, via RTD. So, some type of affordable transportation, I think that's really a big piece. And if we create some solutions for the disabled population, it's going to roll over. There are a lot of disadvantaged financial people live in this state, and some creativity could flow over into that piece too. There are, gosh, you see all these little minivans that are medical, take you to the doctor, that are Medicare based. How do we get maybe insurance companies, health, public health, whatever, tied into this to the benefits, making sure we're getting people, in the outdoors being active and things that maybe it reduces medical costs along the way. Just, I think that's a group that we don't tap into enough. Is, public health, and then the medical field, insurance companies, those types of organizations.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Christina, and then Jen, you're going to be up next. Kurt's put it on the table. It's expensive to be able to get to enjoy, just to transit to these. What ideas do you have, Christina, that we may want to recommend the state do or others do to make it more affordable?
Yeah, absolutely. My brain immediately goes to, I take the Bustang a lot to go skiing because I think it's an amazing tool for this state. One, I think the Bustang does not provide services to a lot of lower income neighborhoods and corners of our state that it should. And while the Bustang is theoretically physically accessible, if you, for example, use a sit ski, probably not going to be able to bring your sit ski on the bus. When you get off of the bus, you've got a mile to walk. What are you going to do with it? I think there are a lot of gaps and things like that we can talk for hours and hours on about how we can better improve Colorado State funded transportation to outdoor areas. But specifically thinking of on the point of price and the socioeconomic barrier of a pay what you can ticket, or a lower price ticket to get on the services that we already have that are going up into the mountains, was my immediate thought of $40 for a Bustang ticket is not realistic if you're already paying a lift ticket, if you're already buying your gear or renting your gear or facing whatever other uphill battle financially that it takes to get to, I'm using skiing specifically as an example, but that was my immediate thought.
I appreciate that. And Kurt, I'm going to build a little bit on the barrier you identified to combine with Sharon's original. And Jen, as you come in, and then I'm going to go to Melanie, I'm going to invite people to address both the affordability of getting the individual there, and what I have heard mixed in of getting the equipment there. And is that viable with the means of transportation that we're talking about, or are there modifications and additions there? But Jen, to you to address any of that of how do we make it more accessible, and let's name it financially affordable for Coloradans with disabilities to find transportation to, whether it's the path downtown at Confluence Park, or the slopes in Breck, or the rivers in BV.
Well, I think with the existing vehicles, it would be relatively easy to add some sort of a bracket like they do with bicycles on the buses that, you could put your skis in, or, maybe there's, one shuttle service, like from Summit County, they add one of their shuttles that is wheelchair accessible. I don't even know if they have that. They might. I don't know if they have wheelchair accessible shuttles. But what I was really thinking is that it would be a great startup company with some probably state funding to start like an outdoor adventure disability transit service type of program that, you could get funding for green, energy efficient, electric type vans that are wheelchair accessible or something that could be within an urban area to take someone to a park, take them up to a ski area, and maybe we get the universities involved in something like this too, that they're the brainchild behind it, and seeing what the feasibility of that is.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to go to Melanie, and then John, I'm going to bring you in on this. What are our solutions? Melanie, your thoughts on the challenge of financially feasibility of individuals getting themselves and at times their equipment to the locations to enjoy some of this recreation.
I think there've been a couple of good ideas so far. The focus on some of the existing modes of transportation and looking at whether there are requirements for those modes to provide accessible transportation and to transport adaptive gear. It's probably worth taking a look at those things because they can be very convenient for people. I realize not for everyone, but they can be convenient for a number of people. Love the idea of a startup that is specifically focused on providing adaptive outdoor transportation and maybe involving universities as well as renewable energy funding that's out there that might be available to provide electric vehicles for this sort of transportation. Those are my two biggest things to add at this point. I'm going to keep noodling on this one.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm going to go to John and then Sharon. And Samantha, I'm going to let you kind of give me the thumbs up or thumbs down of where you want me to drag you into this conversation. You're invited to all of them. John, to you. The topic is, it's pretty expensive and at times, frankly, just darn difficult to get there. What should we do? And whether that's government or private sector or some combination.
Yeah, I fully agree with what's been said. The one thing that I would add is a little bit of personal experience. I went up to Vail this weekend to go skiing with a buddy, and I went on the bus thing, and it was pretty convenient actually, generally. Having the bus go and, get right to the town and all of that. It was pretty good. And I know a lot of people are economically more talented than certain other people are, and the $12.75 disabled ticket might be a problem for them. But I really think that it's sort of counterintuitive, but I really think that the best way to make transportation accessible is by making it universal. And what I mean by that is incorporate the accessibility portion of transportation with a larger conversation about climate change, reducing traffic on the road and all the other topics that we cover as a stated on this point. I really think that there needs to be an integration of these conversations so that one thing feeds off of another. And everybody can benefit.
Thank you, John. We are very good in state government having 8 different people doing things that relate and not knowing about it. So your point of breaking down some of these silos is well heard, and particularly our team, just a month ago was working with the governor and OEDIT on transit-oriented development and front range rail. And I think you're right. We need to make sure all of these conversations are happening together. Sharon, to you, and then Samantha. It's expensive. It can be inconvenient. It cannot always be viable depending on what type of adaptive gear or equipment. What can we as a state, as a community, do to make it better?
I think it might be a mix. I know we have Accessoride already here in Colorado and it serves a great purpose, but it does not really do much for getting to ski resorts or specific events. I know if I wanted to go to a concert and I didn't have a disability, it'd probably be pretty easy to get a group of friends, everybody drink, and then find a shuttle up to Red Rocks. With a bunch of wheelchair users, that's probably not going to be likely. Same thing with like the bus staying. It's a great tool, but if we have equipment, wheelchairs, it becomes difficult again. So maybe if there's a way that we could at least get transportation on specific dates, or, say like once or twice a month, Accessoride provides busing from Denver to whatever ski resort. Maybe once a month, or, a Red Rocks venue, we have an event where, you're able to get from point A to point B and it's covered. Whatever shuttles that they have covering for everyone else, there should at least be some type of, opportunity for us to enjoy the same thing, whether that's to a ski resort, whether that's up to the mountains, whether it's like a wildlife day or a national parks day. We have Accessoride there, we have shuttles there, we have it in other areas. Why can't we have it for, at least like a couple of days for the disability community? And hopefully that one bus, if it was just like one modified bus, it could be spread out over multiple days, and that would also cover equipment being to and from off. It would be equipped to handle our situation.
Thank you, Sharon. Jen, I see your hand up, so let me get you in if you're responding to Sharon, and then Samantha, the floor will be yours. Jen, you're muted.
I also just wanted to throw out in there that we need to think about these things for rural areas, especially here on the Western Slope as well, to keep those thoughts in our mind. And also just a second little thought was, what about Medicaid funding for persons who have Medicaid as a waiver? I know that my daughter has a CES waiver right now, and part of that does pay for like work on her van, but maybe there's a way that funding through the Medicaid or Medicaid waivers could help out with transportation.
Thank you, Jen. And I will confess, you just took this completely outside and above my pay grade or knowledge, but I am happy to reach out to our friends at HICPUF and see what we can learn about any Medicaid sources there. Samantha, your thoughts. We're talking dollars, we're talking access, we're talking some of Colorado's world famous industries. What thoughts do you have of what we could do in government or communities?
Yeah, thanks, Barrick. Definitely appreciate the thoughts that have been shared. I think there's some really good ideas. Definitely going to have to think about this, but I do want to reinforce that I feel like there are these programs that could get more funding, and there are these existing funding pools that we could tap into and bring together to get a really substantial program going. And it's exactly what was just said. These things happen in silos. So I like Sharon's comment about the Accessoride. I wonder if there are opportunities for some really robust pilot programs that are targeting specific communities, just so that we can show the impact, and then showing the impact gets more funding for these types of programs. So just a thought, maybe pilots is where to start, but really appreciate everyone's thoughts so far.
Thank you, Samantha. And fair warning, I will be reaching out to you and Connor, and probably to Shoshana and Sally over at CDOT, and see if we can't pull some information together about the different programs that do exist. So we're not another example of reinventing something that may already exist out there. I'm going to keep this moving along a bit. Christina, I'm going to invite you in, and Jen, I'll tee you up. You're going to be the next to throw a problem at me. But Christina, to you first. This idea of from the moment you leave your door to the moment you drive or you get transported, you park, you unload, you access the entry point. where are there barriers along that continuum?
That's a great question. My mind immediately jumps to trailheads. I think that's a very common one here in the state of Colorado. We have obviously a variety of trailheads on federal, state, local, private lands, all the conundrums, all the laws involved. I think of the usability of trailheads as being an incredibly huge barrier, especially in rural areas, especially outside of the Front Range community, especially where there's a lot of people accessing trails all the time. I think of things like safe parking spaces. Or if you need an accessible parking space, are you having to park alongside a road because there are no accessible parking spaces available? I think of bathrooms. Do you have an accessible bathroom option? Is there a porta potty? Is there an accessible porta potty? Did they think of that? I think of barrier gates, like where you might have to walk kind of sideways to get through, or like sneak your bike through. If you're on an off-road trike, if you're on a track chair, those gates and those barriers are there to keep wildlife out, but also substantially you as well. So yeah, the usability of trailheads is a huge barrier that I personally come across a lot when I go out with my friends. And I'm sure everybody in this call can tell a story about it as well.
So let's pick up there. And Melanie, I'm going to go to you first and then to Sharon on solutions. But Christina's talking about just arriving at a trailhead, whether that's the extent of the parking available or these barriers that get put up. And I would love to hear what solutions and whether, Melanie, I know you had talked about, is there a way to audit and better manage what's labeled as handicap parking? What else can and should we be doing for all of our trailheads, whether it's something going to the Flatirons or it's something out in Durango or just a trailhead downtown? What can we do about the parking? And then let's talk about these barriers. This gets into what maybe there's a simple solution, while we still acknowledge, as Christina said, that there may be these holes in the ground to keep wildlife or to keep somebody from taking an ATV or their Jeep onto the trail. What are practical solutions to ensure that Coloradans using adaptive equipment can get in and that they can park there in the first place? And Melanie, I won't call on you to solve that full spectrum of challenges. I'll invite you to address any one or more pieces of it. And then I'm going to go from you to Sharon.
Yeah, I'm really sort of like a dog with a bone right now on this parking issue, because I do think it's a very real issue. And I think, I don't know if there are enough accessible parking spaces. Have we reviewed what the current laws and codes are for the number of accessible parking spaces that need to be provided? Do they, in fact, provide accessible access from the parking location to the activity? I'm hearing that often doesn't happen. I do think there is, as I mentioned earlier, sort of overuse or loose availability of permits for accessible parking spaces that maybe are not as restrictive as they should be, so that people who really need them have access to those spaces. I think it's a huge issue. And spaces where you can have access to whatever your adaptive equipment is, and get that adaptive equipment out of your vehicle, and having spaces on a road or on a busy road where people are driving doesn't sound like that's particularly safe and accessible. And I just think we have a ton of work to do in that space.
Carrie, let's include in our notes. We'll get some information together and maybe have somebody do a little bit of a primer for everybody on what is required and in what circumstances and what locations, and how much of that is state and how much is our local partners when it comes to a lot of this. Sharon, to you. Christina has said that parking and just getting onto the trailhead itself, not so simple. How do we make it better?
Definitely adding more spaces. There's been a couple of trailheads where I've gone to, the more popular ones. I have maybe about a mile range of my physical ability for some walking, and a lot of times I'm parking almost at my max range of just being able to get to the trailhead. Uh, so I can't even enjoy the trail. I'm exhausted and worn out by the time I get there. So definitely the location of the parking. I think kind of like Melanie said, how accessible is it to the trailhead exactly? So if you might label something as handicap parking if it's a half mile or a mile away. That's no longer accessible to me. So that's one piece, and then definitely bathrooms. Hopefully this isn't TMI for too many people, but usually the bathrooms are one of the first things that I think going to and from a location. I usually carry a urinal in the vehicle. If there is not somewhere to go to the bathroom when I get there, I'm usually in trouble. If there's not somewhere to go to the bathroom when I'm leaving, I'm in trouble. Even if that's not portalets, it could be something as simple as a privacy wall, just a couple of a couple of boards built up labeled, go to the bathroom because I am terrified of having to go out in public and getting in trouble for exposing myself, or if you have to do something or cath or any other reason, just a privacy wall would be great at a lot of parking lots. There might be some education that needs to take place there too and what they're for, but I think that would help a lot.
Thanks, Rob. And I didn't give you warning, but Jen, to you next, and then Samantha. What do we do about the parking and just the basic access to getting into it?
Well, this is probably bigger picture than you're looking for, but it needs to be a mindset that has changed because the trails were built many years ago, and even some of them that have been built recently weren't built with accessibility in mind. And so we have to really start with whoever the planners are and say, hey, if you're going to make a new trail, we need to make sure that this is accessible. And then the maintenance of those areas as well. I don't remember who was talking about it, but I might be able to get to the parking lot, but then there's a ridge built up from water or something like that I can't get up to the trail with a wheelchair. And of course, we're talking about mobility things. There's a lot of other access issues too. But I think, yeah, changing a mindset and just keeping maintenance up and going on a lot of places.
Thanks, Jen. Kurt, jump in here. How are we going to fix this?
So I think the parking thing is kind of not just a disabled issue. That I think it's another thing like John was talking about that we can probably work across lines because I know the state's dealing with a lot of those problems already. So that addressing that, I think maybe creating some kind of like an ambassador program of people that, whether it's volunteers or whatever, that are at the parks that are trying to educate people on, taking care of each other and being nice. And those ambassadors would include individuals with disabilities, so that we could say, hey, I think people listen to that a lot more, the lived experience sharing, something along that line. I also have to say the bathroom issue. I had a coworker that asked me to mention this if it ever comes up, that she has a young son who has a lot of disabilities, pretty extreme disabilities. And the bathroom thing, when they want to go out as a family to a park, is really a big deal. Them being able to change, they got to go back to their car, literally do it in the back of the SUV, right in the middle of a parking lot. That's really hard. So having appropriate bathrooms that that parents can go in, co-ed, or that mothers or fathers could go in would be a big thing. But I think I don't know, ambassador program. I see a couple heads shaking, yay, something along that line. I mean, and again, it's something that the whole state's dealing with. It's all the population. We aren't just talking about a disability issue with the parking. So, and I will say that it is one of that discourages me from going to most parks, because you see all the issues and why there are so many other opportunities for me to go to. So I don't go to those places because of that.
Thanks, Kurt. John, to you, and then Samantha on this question of parking and the barriers to physically accessing the trailhead, whether those are these poles or gates or other things.
Yeah, I think that there's a good greenfield opportunity with respect to rural areas that might have with those little gates that count prevent cows from getting out of the range. I've seen those a little bit. Just basic repair and maintenance of those, because a lot of times you have like a bent locking mechanism or some kind of non-functional, otherwise useless like lock, and people with disabilities can't really like work their way out of it. Like I often find myself just hopping the fence pretty much, but for other people that's not possible. That's a very small thing that we can fix pretty easily. At least for the state maintained trailheads, like that should be pretty easy to do. But more comprehensively, I just think of a better way of putting signage up, not only on the trailhead itself, what the trails do, how hard they are, where they go, like putting it in braille, for example. Like I'm not blind, but I am visually impaired, mildly, thankfully. I can totally see that being a problem for people who are visually impaired, but moreover, for people who have difficulty seeing where to go physically, in terms of trail markers and figuring out where to go, having trails be marked, having roads be marked, like that would make a big difference in terms of access for people who already have a hard time doing things. It just makes things easier just for someone to not really have to think about where to look for things. I know for me at least, when I have trouble looking for something, I just give up because it's just not worth my effort, So that might be a way to get more people involved.
Thank you, John. And on a big piece of what you were sharing, and you missed this at the beginning, but we're doing today, this transit to entry. We're going to do one about utilizing the facility itself, where we'll probably get into things like restrooms or trail condition or facility condition. We're also going to do a dedicated conversation about information and technology separately, and whether that's information about trails or apps where people can access more information about what is accessible. So I want to assure you that I'm not brushing over that today. We're going to go deep into it. Samantha, to you on this question of parking, and then I'm going to leave it open. We haven't heard a lot about how do we address the physical barriers to the trails. And I've been there. It literally is a lot of times these gates that are locked and have a 24-inch pathway that you can maybe turn sideways and squeeze through. So Samantha, to you or to everybody else, I'm going to invite to also weigh in on not just the parking, but what are some common sense solutions to how we can make trailheads themselves more accessible while providing the security of the barriers that are there. But Samantha, hit on either piece of that.
Yeah, thanks, Barrick. You touched on kind of the app technology side of things, so I think I'm going to save my comments and share them with Connor for a later point. So I'm opening it up back to folks on the general accessibility question that you asked.
Quite all right, and I appreciate that. So to everybody, You go to a trailhead, there's either a locked gate with a narrow passage that you can squeeze through, or maybe there's a removable post, but you have to be with Parks and Wildlife or the fire department to have one of the 27 keys to get it out. What's a better way? What could we do to make that so that people with adaptive equipment can access that trailhead and we can still maintain the security intended for wildlife and for vehicles of that? And in this case, I'm not going to call. I'm going to look to people to raise their hand, but if you don't, I will. Jen, jump in.
What about something like you use at ski areas where it's just the bars are there and you've got your pass and it scans your pass and it opens the gate?
That's an option. Who else? Kurt, I'm going to call you in here. What is some way that we can keep a barrier that maintains wildlife safety, that maintains the prohibition on vehicles getting onto some of these trailheads, but would allow somebody with adaptive equipment to access?
The one big idea I would have is asking the parks crews, the people who work, Division of Wildlife, all those people, that they may not be aware of this issue, but if you actually brought it to their attention, that they're pretty awesome folks, creative, that they may have some solutions to that. Maybe even private industry that provides the barriers might have, if they knew there was a market for that, they might come up with solutions too. I mean, I'm not the engineer, that mentality, but I think those folks, usually, it's pretty surprising if you go that route. Ask, somebody might have an idea.
No, I appreciate that. I'm going to bring Sharon in. I also want to be very transparent with everybody. I am always going to push us to be able to offer as specific and as aspirational of solutions as possible. I also want everybody to be very comfortable saying our recommendation is do better. Our recommendation is get with the people that operate it and find a way to make it more accessible. So if you don't have the engineering and mechanical solution, I still want everybody to lean into these conversations and say, I don't know what it is, but there has to be some way that I can wave my phone or wave a wand and I'm getting access. Sharon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking along kind of those lines. I'm definitely not an engineer, but I feel like there should be some type of S-style entry or something that we could set up where, it's preventing people from just a straight shot in, whether that's vehicles or wildlife in and out. I know Representative Ortiz said he had spoke with some engineers on different projects and different issues. Maybe there's someone that we could speak to that would help us with that. And then especially for trailheads and outdoor access, it just being a requirement where there's at least one accessible entry, whether that's on a map, so it's clearly marked the same way you would mark you are here in a bathroom. You have an accessible entry at this location that you can get into, making sure those are always updated. And when we get to technology, making sure that, and maybe even like a physical post saying what's accessible and not accessible right there on the outside. So we're not struggling to find out if this is for us or if I can make it in and out. Just making that a requirement that all businesses, trailheads have to have something labeled where it's accessible or not accessible.
Appreciate that, Sharon. We've got 5 or 10 more minutes, and I'm saying 5 or 10 because I don't know if we have members of the public. I'll make this announcement as I do in case anybody's listening or watching the stream. If you are a member of the public who would like to address this subcommittee, I'd ask you to drop me a message in the chat. This is Barrick Abramson. Just drop me a message in the chat, letting me know your name and if you represent a particular organization, who that is. And we will plan to have public comment if we have any at 4:15, which is why I say we may have 5 minutes, we may have 10, 15 to continue this conversation. But I'm going to open it up. We've tackled some of the issues of being able to access equipment, being able to get equipment to a location. We've talked about the cost of transportation. We've talked about some of the absurdities of parking at some of these locations. We've talked about the physical barriers to even getting onto the trailheads. Looking again at this continuum from the moment a Coloradan with a disability leaves their home, their transportation, their arrival, their parking, or whatever vehicle they were driven in, being able to access, to them being able to gain entry to whether it's that riverhead, whether it's that trailhead, that ski resort, that park, or that path. Are there other specific barriers that somebody wants to name that we can workshop some better conditions for? John, you were late, which means teachers calling on you. I just giving you a hard time, my friend. You've navigated so many of these venues and locations. What is a challenge in the transportation, the parking, the arrival, or just walking through or rolling through that gate that we need to find a better solution for?
Well, just like the physical gate access, are you talking about?
Any of it, yeah.
Well, I think we've covered that pretty in depth. As I mentioned before, the natural spaces. There's only so much you can do. But I'm thinking for like the more curated spaces that has like platforms and existing lookouts and all of that. I mean, to the extent that there are no ramps available for wheelchairs or you know, like I said, braille sign perhaps, dog friendly pathways for visually impaired people. I mean, I'm sure I've seen a lot of parks do this, so I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know about already. But just like generally making things like better maintained and like I said, like for the natural like hiking trails, I don't feel like it's appropriate to physically adjust nature to accommodate people as much as we want them to access the outdoors. I just think that's gonna be too far. There's only so much that we can do without disrupting the beauty of nature that we all enjoy.
Appreciate that perspective. Thank you, John. In a couple minutes, I'm going to move us onto the conversation about, for everything we've just been exploring, what do you need to learn? What information do you need? What data? And who do you need to hear from? Before I go there, though, a few more minutes here, if anybody would like to offer additional thoughts, whether it's barriers we need to continue to explore in this transit to entry continuum or solutions to them. Jen, your hand is up. Jump in.
I saw a Facebook video last week about, and this goes along with Christina's safety in bathrooms and Sharon as well, is that they had adult changing tables at the Denver Zoo that they just put in. And it's kind of a quiet family room and was really aesthetically pleasing. And it was, big enough that somebody could use that for beyond a toddler and a diaper age for a small kid to be able to have that be more user-friendly for someone in a wheelchair or that had a catheter or whatever that they might need.
Thank you, Jen. Other thoughts? Anybody have barriers you want to identify or solutions you'd like to offer? And if not at this point, I hope you know by now that none of these doors ever close in these conversations. So we're going to continue this. We'll capture the ideas we heard today. It's going to be part of the ongoing conversation. The next, Sharon, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I had just something real quick. I was just thinking with some of the parking pass issues and things like that going on. If there's a difference between, say, if someone hurts their ankle or, has a broken leg, they get a handicap parking pass and people are misusing it. I have to jump through so many hoops to get approved for disability issues, for long-term healthcare. There has to be some way we can attach a pass to some of those things for the people that are actually jumping through these hoops. It's almost a part-time job just for me filling out paperwork to prove that I'm disabled. And I guarantee you, people with parking passes do not have to go through everything that I'm going through on a regular basis. So there's something there where I could get a pass from, my county, or I could get a pass when I'm approved for long-term healthcare services. That's separate than someone who's just sprained their ankle and needs a handicap parking pass for, a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Sharon. Anybody else before I pose the next question to you? As I said, this conversation will continue. The way we're going to approach this is we're going to distill and synthesize all the ideas that were raised today. John, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it doesn't have to do with it doesn't have to do with the barrier to entry. I didn't want to reiterate a point that I made last time. We really should get studies on this to see what the actual problems are, because we can only speak from our own lived experiences and the experiences that our loved ones have had, unless we have other institutional knowledge, which many of us don't have, including me. So it would be really helpful to get studies on this.
Thanks, John. Sometimes I think you're reading my mind, or you have my notes, or that I just need to see if I can recruit you to come work with us. That's exactly what we want to do, is we want to identify what research, what studies, what information is needed. And John, I know you had asked Carrie a question she shared with me about process and the report. And this all fits perfectly with what I'm going to ask you all now. Our obligation is to submit a report with your recommendations. And as I shared, is our recommendations for changes, guidance, best practices by December 1st of this year to the task force. We are going to try to have the bulk of that developed in advance of December, so that if there's need for legislators to pull bill titles, if we're going to ask the governor to include something in his budget, we're ahead of that. What that's going to mean is we're going to be spending really July, August, September together workshopping the specific solutions and proposals we want to offer, which is why we're doing these sets of conversations initially on this transit to entry. Next will be on venue or facility usage, and then on knowledge and technology and public awareness. And then we're going to continue to capture all of the ideas, the barriers and the crosswalk ideas that you're generating, and be able to then really workshop the solutions. To be able to effectively get there, though, we know that just brainstorming isn't going to get it. We know that we're only fewer than a dozen people on a call. We need data, we need research, we need exemplars of what's happening other places, and we probably need to hear from a lot of other folks. So this is now my question for everybody, and I still don't have public comment. People signed up, which means I get to use the next 5 to 10 minutes of time with all of you on this. My question to you is two-part. What information, whether that's examples, study, data, or research, do you need to make more informed recommendations about better systems for transportation, transit, parking, and access? And part two, who do you want to hear from? And when I say who do you want to hear from, that can be somebody at CDOT that can talk about parking. That can be somebody from the Association of County Commissioners to talk about local government. It can be industry to talk about private transportation. Or you can tell me, Barrick, what we really need to do is hear from 15 different city parks departments, or we need to hear from 500 Coloradans with disabilities through a focus group. So I open it up to the whole group. I'll ask you to raise your hands rather than me calling on you. What do you need to learn? What can we bring you in terms of information? And what additional voices, whether professionals or lived experience, will be helpful to you in developing our recommendations on the transit to parking to entry group of issues here?
Yeah, I have several. This is my own mind as a lawyer. I'm probably overdoing it a little bit, but I would really love to see physical animal dogs that I can review and figure out what the biggest problems are in Colorado specifically regarding different, like for example, what is the breakdown of the kinds of disabilities that Colorado now? Who generally uses outdoor spaces and who doesn't? What kind of programs already exist that we can tap into and enhance to some degree? These what kind of adaptive tools would most be used or utilized in a manner that we can justify adding a line item to the budget? Those are the kind of things that I think would move the needle from a legislative standpoint and have the most impact.
Thank you, John. And I'm scribbling some notes. I know Carrie is typing as well. I think you highlight a number of things that we need to find out. Some of it is basic demographer and statistical data about what, as you said, what types of disabilities, how many Coloradans are living with it, and what the implications are. What do we know about outdoor rec and who's using it? We'll also get with CDOT, we'll get with HICPUF and some others. I can't promise I will be able to generate every piece of data and research. I will promise we will try our best to pull as much as we can. I saw some hands popping up. I think, Melanie, I saw your physical hand, and then Christina, and then Kurt raised their hands. So let me go in that order of what do you need to learn, or what information can we bring you? And what voices do you think we need to hear from?
Thanks. It would be great to get just a good backgrounder from federal, state, and local state parks, the federal agencies, and local governments on what's on the topics we were talking about today. What's required? Where are we falling short? Do we need requirements or do we need maintenance and enforcement?
Fair point. And I will tell you, in several of our other subcommittees, that same question has been raised. Is it a matter of we're not requiring it, or is it a matter of we're not enforcing compliance? And I don't have those answers, but we will endeavor to bring you as much of that information as possible. Christina, and then Kurt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep this brief. I have a lot of thoughts on what data I would love to have and what voices I'd love to hear from.
Email me the long list.
Great. Kind of immediately off the top of my head, today's discussion really focused on physical disabilities, and I think that's a really easy thing to gravitate to, especially when we're talking about costs of gear and parking and bathrooms, like definitely gravitating towards that. I would love more data on what folks with non-physical disabilities are, what barriers they're facing when they come to an outdoor space, whether that's, your city park in Denver or somewhere out in the mountains. Specifically, the IDD community is such a huge part of folks with disabilities in this country, and I would love to know more about what those barriers specifically are. And then just in terms of voices to hear from, somebody mentioned focus groups. Absolutely. I would love to hear from specifically non-physically disabled communities as like, what barriers are you facing? What's going on? What do you have to tell me? I think that that's always, I work in government. That's always where I get the most oomph to do my job. And I think that that could be a huge oomph for us to do our job. And then I would also love to hear the voices of our park rangers, our park staff, folks that are working in, again, everyone from BPR to the ranger out in Durango. Because if there is a barrier that is immediately met, they are that quote unquote first responder. They're the ones talking with the individual. I'd love to know, one, what barriers our park staff are seeing routinely, and two, what education they're getting on accessible rec, on folks with disabilities going out into these trails. You know, do they have understanding and knowledge that folks with catheters are going to be in their bathrooms? Probably not. That's probably not something you're getting in ranger training. Anyway, I would love more context on all of that, and that's my short list.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I'll follow up with you. I will tell you, our housing subcommittee raised some of the same flags that when we talk about accessibility and who needs it, are we talking strictly about physical and mobility issues? Are we talking about developmental and cognitive? Are we talking about invisible? And for full transparency, when you mention IBD, I'm somebody who 4 years ago almost lost my life to Crohn's disease and woke up in my mid 40s to trying to navigate a world where my intestine was sticking into a bag and access to restrooms was a much different reality then. So
Totally.
I appreciate you raising some of that.
Yeah.
Kurt, what do you need to learn? What information do we need to bring you? And who do you need to hear from so we can make informed recommendations?
I think what I'd really like to know are the people that are not using our outdoors, not taking advantage of it, and the reasons why. Some kind of there's that group that's using it now and they found a way to do it, but why are other people that? I mean, that's the greater population probably. I think that's the question the disabled population doesn't get. That's the group. There are those of us who've always been active that we're given all the input. Well, why? I want to connect with the people that are not participating and see why. That's the big one. Then I would also say more info from the neurodivergent population, blind, visually impaired, and then the deaf community too. We really don't have much input here to see what their thoughts are on this. And then along with, I agree with Christina a lot, is what do state employees, what do municipalities, counties, whatever the staff that work at parks and private industry, what do they not know? I was a city employee in Denver for 27 years. Most of those employees want to do the right thing. They may just not know, not be aware. They may have the solutions if they're given the chance to know. That's a big group, I think, that can have a huge impact.
I appreciate that. And let me see if we can't pull some type of panel together of combination of park rangers and parks and rec officials and others responsible for maintenance and operation on that. In just a minute, I'm going to bring Carrie in because Kurt, you mentioned being able to hear from the people who aren't. And I will tee up, Carrie's going to talk a little bit about Engage Dora again. One of our big asks for you to think about between now and our next meeting is going to be, what networks could you help us reach out to and what questions would we want to ask them? We do have a pretty robust ability to do online surveys. We can do some small group online focus groups as well if you all would like, but would love to work with all of you to put together a short survey that we can ask people and have you help us get that into as many hands as possible. And maybe one of those questions is, what forms of out recreation do you not use because of barriers, and what are those barriers? So I want everybody to be thinking about that, and I appreciate you raising that, Kurt. Jen, to you, and then Carrie, I'm going to bring you in on the Engage Dora front.
One group that I've worked with in other meetings that did a lot of good is CASTA. I don't know the acronym, but they're the big transportation coalition in the state, and they might be really be able to help us out. I think they'd be great to hear from. And also, we have a great resource in our state in Eric Weinmeier and No Barriers that I think would be really, great to bring, to maybe see if we can bring him in if we hear his thoughts.
I'm glad you mentioned Eric. I just saw him this weekend. So I agree with that. Forgot to mention.
Now, thank you, John, and Carrie and I will reach out to CASTA. I think you're right. That the Association of Transit Agencies across the state who could probably bring some great information. Carrie, I'm down to the last few minutes. Engage Dora. What are you thinking, and what should folks know?
I just want to reiterate, I think a lot of this comes down to you guys are the experts in the field and you're here for a reason and you have your own networks. If you can go on that engagedora.org site, and I'm happy to email it to you after the fact, there's a place where people can share stories. And I think it's very, very impactful, not just for this subcommittee, but for each of the others in the main task force to hear these stories from across the state. So if you want to go on, if you go on that, you can share it via email, Facebook, any of your socials, and just ask people within your community and your networks to share their stories if they're willing. They can all be written there. The entire task force will be able to read those and reflect on them. I think that would be really helpful and impactful. I think the lived experiences is a big way to move the needle on some of these topics. And then please, as Barrick noted, keep sending us information that you guys have from your own experience, and especially recommendations of folks and different organizations you'd like to hear from, because we're starting to build that up so that we can get rolling with our recommendations next month.
Thank you, Carrie. In the last 2 minutes, I want to thank, we continue to have tremendous support and engagement, obviously from DORA, where this task force sits. Their staff is on the line. The Lieutenant Governor, you've probably seen her and her staff. This is so important to this Lieutenant Governor. She has carved out for every subcommittee, every single meeting. She's been joining, as has her policy advisor and often her chief of staff. So your ideas are not just a debating society. You have a very attentive audience in state government that wants to learn from this task force. What we will do is follow up. We're going to consolidate a ton of great ideas, both into minutes of the meeting, but also into topics to address and some of the folks that you identified. We'll circulate that over the next 2 weeks to get you guys to either correct us or add to that list. And then we'll work to start pulling this information together. The next meeting will follow up on a piece of this with some continued conversation about solutions and any of the data or research we're able to pull together. And then we'll move the conversation into that next point. Once you have gained entry into a point of recreation, and again, park, ski resort, river, trailhead, mountain bike trail, or urban corridor, and we'll want to start brainstorming this same set of questions of what are the barriers, what are the challenges inside these recreation venues, and what can we do to make it a better situation? With that, I just want to humbly thank all of you. As Carrie said, we're facilitators. We're not the experts, and it really is our honor to be able to learn from all of you and support you in advising the state on creating a Colorado for everybody. So thank you all for continuing to give us your time. We'll follow up by email. Reach out if anything new comes to mind, and otherwise, we'll see you in a month.
Thank you.
Eric.
Thanks all.